So we are Australia's largest independent forestry services provider, and what that means, it is an important distinction to other businesses. And I'm not going to talk about ABP at all today because it's a different company. We don't own any of the trees or the land that we manage. We're a management company. So, if anyone in the room came to us and said, we've got a large patch of trees that we want you to manage, we would entertain doing that sort of stuff. So it is a distinction. We have a New Zealand parent company that's just recently merged with another company. So you may see a rebranding or name change in the near future, but that's just by the by. Our head office is in Melbourne. We have a local office here in Hamilton where I'm based. We manage nearly 50,000 hectares in the region. We have another large area over in southwestern Western Australia, and also some small areas up in New South Wales, probably similar to those areas that David was talking about earlier. We employ about 15 staff in the region. We are dual certified, which I'll touch on a little bit in the presentation, and most people may have heard of New Forests, who's our largest client. They represent about 95% of our business in terms of the land that we manage and the land around this Cavendish area. So I'll talk a little bit about them as well. This is just a map. Sorry, it's a bit small, but this sort of highlights just the blobs on that map, just highlight the areas that we manage in the Green Triangle. So we stretch basically from down in the Otways with some small areas down there, across into South Australia, up into an area called the Wattle Range. And yeah, as I said, it's about 50,000 hectares. I've got a whole heap of stats about the Green Triangle, and these are broader forest industry stats rather than PF Olsen. Bear with me while I go through them a little bit, but there's about 330,000 hectares of plantations in the Green Triangle, both hardwood and softwood, pine and blue gums. That only represents 6% of the land area in that region. So whilst it's a big number, it's still a relatively small part of the landscape. The estimates that are put out by the Forest Industry Hub, that's an economic output of about $1.5 billion annually, which is about 7% of the GT's total output. Claims to support 3,000 workers directly in the forest industry, and estimated 5.8 million tonnes of carbon sequestered each year annually as well. And obviously, supporting timber for housing, packaging and paper. So that's probably my ad for the industry, if you like. I'm just going to drill in a little bit further, or a little bit closer. So this is the map of our areas around Cavendish. So Cavendish is just down on the bottom corner of the map there. So that's the areas that we manage around here. I mentioned about New Forests. They own all of that land that we manage on their behalf. I'm not sure how much people know about New Forests. They are a large investment business, managing forests across the world, or owning land and forests across the world. Like any investment model, they're looking to maximise their return on that land and looking for the best option. And so that can range from hardwood to softwood to agriculture. We don't tend to see agriculture in the GT, but for anyone that's travelled through Western Australia would see that they've got large cropping enterprises over there that are still managed by PF Olsen. Why that's relevant to here, for anyone that, well, I'm looking in the room and I'm assuming everyone's local, so excuse me if they're not. Anyone that's been around and seen those signs on gates, we've had areas of land that has remained unplanted for quite a few years. As New Forests were reviewing their options and considering agriculture. So those lands were potentially going to get, reverted back. Only recently, and when I say recently, in the last 12 months, under a HBU, a highest and best use model that they entertain, which is basically looking to maximise every hectare of land. And these areas, and this is will get replanted with trees and will get replanted with pine trees. And so that's a bit of I don't know if it's a bombshell, but it is quite a shift in direction for what you've seen recently. And I guess I really want to talk about that just for a moment to give a little bit of context to it. For anyone who knows anything about the hardwood industry at the moment, hardwood chip at the moment is sold internationally. So all the forests or plantations in the region of hardwood are chipped and then exported through the Port of Portland. Probably for the last 2 or 3 years, about the same time I ironically, that I've been at P.F. Olsen, the market there has been absolutely awful and dreadful. So much so we're probably operating at 30% of the capacity that we should be on an annual basis, which just is a sign of the global economic market. So markets are a big part of it. The other part of it is, the alternative would be grow softwood, which would go into a structural product. Again, if you're looking at a national level, we do have a shortage of structural material in the country. We import a huge amount of timber and lumber from overseas, and there is potential for us to substitute that with locally and domestically grown products. So there is a shift there. So that's a key motivation. The other motivation I'm only going to touch on really briefly today is koalas, and so not such an issue up here, but you don't have to travel far south of here where koalas become a really big issue for the industry and managing the welfare of those koalas through our operations. It comes at a huge cost, but it's not about the cost, it's actually just the risk involved in it. It does have the potential to stop a business, has the potential to stop the industry. And so from a risk mitigation point of view, our clients are looking for alternatives out of that. So between markets and koalas, and I guess the icing on the cake is carbon opportunity. And so that is there is a financial gain for the client to do that. They can change species, grow trees, sequester carbon, and there's a carbon an ACU, an Australian carbon credit unit, which has a financial value. So businesses like New Forest can start trading in that as well. So there is a financial aspect to it as well. So I just wanted to paint the picture a little bit from a high level about who we are, why we are what we do. I really want to then drill into what we do at a local level, and this is sort of the question that Jamie and Kylie asked me. What are you actually doing on these sites? What are we doing in managing the land and the trees to help preserve and protect these trees? And just following up from the previous speakers, it's clear, not just to people who have them on their farms and locals, but even us as managers, that they are such a critical part of the landscape, and what can we do to protect and preserve them. So I just want to talk about that in terms of the operations that we do, and some of the stuff that you'll see as you're driving past some of these properties in the area. So I just took a photo of this map yesterday and slipped it in, but really before we do any operations there's a level of planning that's done for each of those. We have regular visits to sites. I guess part of our conditions with our management is that we're doing property inspections and providing feedback to the clients on those things. There's a whole range of quality control we do on the various operations as well. But in particular, we are looking at those native vegetations. This was actually a harvesting operation at a property called Redwood, a little bit further north of here, up towards Rocklands. And so that one's a little bit different in that it has got a few waterways, some remnant vegetation in it, but all of those things are taken into account, as we're planning around those different operations. I just wanted to put an extra slide in. I'm not sure it actually fits in here, but I thought it was quite interesting. And again, sorry the slides aren't really that clear, but the bottom corner down here is sort of our first evolution, and this is actually quite important because every remnant tree that we have on the estate or the properties that we manage is actually mapped. And so you can't quite see, it's a bit dull, but you can see these green dots on the pinkish purplish background. So that's every red gum tree. This is a property that we call Kia Ora. It's only about 5 k's up the road. It's actually the closest property we have to town. So every one of those green dots is a red gum tree or a cluster of those trees. Again, it was interesting to see some of David's slides with capturing that data, and we're doing some work around that if we can get a better picture of that. But for that particular land unit there, we've got those mapped, and that's effectively just the tree itself. And then the pink area that's remaining represents about 110 hectares of what we would call plantable land, and that's where we'd start. I'll get into this into the next slide or two, but we initially apply a 5 metre buffer around every single tree. So that's from what we call the drip line. It's a visual assessment of that. We put a 5 metre buffer around every one of those trees. I was actually a little bit surprised by this when we did the numbers. So that reduces the area from 110 just to 103 hectares, which is, in my mind, was bugger all actually. I thought it would be a bit bigger. And then we just ran a hypothetical because, I don't know where this will end, but, if we said, look, let's make that a 20 metre buffer for a whole bunch of reasons and some of the stuff that we spoke about earlier, that reduces that area down to about 80 hectares. So why is that important? I'm not sure. I'm going to talk a little bit more about buffers, but I just thought that was just an interesting bit of information. But that's really where we start at the moment, knowing where all those trees are, and then we start applying buffers around that. Also, just an interesting statistic, if you like, in the GT alone, we've got about 8,500 individual remnant trees mapped across the nearly 50,000 hectares that we manage. So I want to actually just dig into some of our operations. So again, this is stuff that, if you're driving around at the right time of the year that you would actually see. We've got a property just out the road called Woolbrook that most people might be familiar with that was planted last year. And this is just, I guess, the typical regime that we would do in those areas. Obviously, for some of those properties that have been left fallow for quite a few years now, like some of them 6 or 7 or 8 years, we would apply a holding spray to control some of those weeds that would pop up over that time. But typically, what we call at year 0, so when the trees themselves are planted, we would do an application of herbicide along those planting rows, and then at year 1, so critical that we give it those first couple of years of a weed-free growth. I guess all the chemicals that we apply, done under strict adherence to the labels. Everything's on the FSC approved list. And again, I come back to that 5 metres from the drip line. That's sort of the golden number that we work to around those herbicide applications. The cultivation that you can see on the photo there, again, we apply that 5 metre from the drip line buffer or restriction, and same with our tree planting itself. Fertiliser, this is one of the key differences between, I guess, the blue gums that have been grown and the move to pine. Basically at pine, we don't do that establishment fertiliser that we normally give the boost with the blue gums. With the pines, we'll do a foliar sample at age 3 to determine if there's any deficiencies. And so, the stuff that we're looking at this year, for example, not up here, but in other areas, has identified, a really strong or a really weak copper deficiency, for example. And so we'll be applying a copper sort of treatment to those trees to get them growing. It's one off. And the other one that, a few people have asked about in the past is around insecticides. And again, I'll take this as a positive from moving from the blue gums to pine, is that there's no insecticides applied to pines as there would be with blue gums. That's basically, so it's quite intensive for the first few years, getting the trees up and away. And then after that, they're largely managed themselves. We obviously have to manage fire and preventing fire, accessing both the crop trees and the remnant trees. And then we shift into a harvesting phase. Again, a little bit different between the pine and the blue gum, where blue gums are just growing and clear fallen. But with pine, we'll actually thin those. There'll usually be 2 thinnings and a clear fall. Growing out to about age 30 is sort of a fairly standard regime for this area. And I just wanted to talk about some of this stuff. It actually applies to the blue gums that we've harvested. That's a photo from Tassie, but it was just more a visual to show some of the machinery that operates. But again, this is just some of the stuff that I pulled out of one of our timber harvesting plans in terms of the standard way that we would approach these operations. So any crop trees, the blue gums or pines in the future, they need to be fallen away into the plantations and away from those remnant trees. No machinery is allowed to enter or disturb any of that native vegetation at all. And relatively minor things, but pretty important around watercourses, but also we've got a restriction of 50 metres within any watercourse or remnant vegetation for fuel and oil changes. We have a range of exclusion zones, and just touching on those, what we call high conservation value for native vegetation, anything of cultural heritage as well, and any other sort of special values. So we'll have exclusion zones on those. Buffers again along any drainage features, and they'll range from the sites that we're in. We have a range of controls over fire season and wet weather. So, operations will quite often stop if it's too hot or the conditions are bad in fire season. And similarly, we try and plan and schedule better so we're not harvesting when, it's going to be wet and causing issues, but we do have to keep an eye on that. And then also post-harvest, how do we manage that slash and residue? And again, a few of the speakers have talked about, that burning and impacting on these trees. So we do have, so if we are windrowing and burning, sometimes we'll spread, sometimes we'll windrow and burn. We do have a 50 metre limit on how close those windrows for burning can be to those remnant trees. And if we've got an external boundary adjacent to native vegetation, like a state forest, it's actually increased to 100 metres. So that's kind of what we do. They're our standards and guidelines. And I guess I wanted to share that today to let you know, how we apply it. Hopefully behind all that, hopefully I can convey to you behind all that is, it is a genuine care for those trees. And what I want to talk about next is some of the other stuff that we're doing. A lot of these prescriptions that we've got now are based on what we know now, what we think we know now, but we want to be better informed and make better decisions. So I want to just talk a little bit more about that if I can. This probably is a little bit of an ad for P.F. Olsen, so I won't overdo it, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the timeline and some of the critical points in here, which I'll flesh out a little bit more. So P.F. Olsen's been in existence in Australia, if you like, since 2011. And through that, some of the key points around it is 2013 we achieved FSC certification, 2015 was responsible wood, so it's a forest management certification. There's definitely people in the room better qualified to talk about that than me. 2016, this is a really interesting one, BirdLife Australia, a key partnership that we have with them, which is just, this year is celebrating a 10-year partnership, which is really important. I want to show a little bit of information that we've done there. Then in 2020, we engaged a company called Abzico to help us with some of our native vegetation assessments that we do. Prior to that, most of it was done in-house, and so it's kind of like the something rule in the hen house, but this was an independent party that would come in and help us with that, a little bit more structured around it. And at the same time, and I don't think it was coincidental, New Forest, who's our client, changed from a fixed term fund to an open-ended fund, and that might not sound like much, but typically these investment funds work on a 5 or a 10-year sort of time horizon, and so that's all they're interested in. Let's get in there for 5 or 10 years, get my money and get out. Whereas at an open-ended fund, there's no end date on this, and so for me, that's quite comforting, as an employer and as a client, but it also means they are here for the long haul, and so suddenly the mindset shifts a little bit from, here's a 5 or 10 year horizon to here's I won't say a forever horizon, but it's a much longer term. And so that was a really critical moment for us, but also for New Forest. So that occurred in about 2020. And at the same time, I just want to highlight too, there was we kicked off our first PhD study. So New Forest fund that themselves, shared with the university obviously. So it's a joint funded project, and this was around birds as well. And so I want to talk about some of the data in that. And then just rolling on, so that PhD finished in last year, so we've got some stuff we want to share with that. And then we've also kicked off 2 new PhDs, which I want to talk about a little bit as well. They're due to finish in 2027, so it's a little bit early, but those 2 are around large old trees, which is exactly what we're here to talk about, so I want to just touch on that a little bit. And also the restorative effects of Australian marsupials, which is probably more aimed in WA, I think, so I probably can't say too much about that one. As I said, last year we celebrated the 10 years of BirdLife Australia. I'm going to jump straight in because the BirdLife Australia one is a really interesting one. It's certainly not got the length of information that Professor Lindemeier talked about, but it is 10 years of data. in really simple terms, we've got two charts here. One's about the number of species of birds, and then this one's just about the number of birds themselves. We're talking about woodland birds, so some of the stuff that we've already been talking about, and we were comparing birds within the plantations, which is the brighter green line at the bottom. The darker green line in the middle is what we've called the control, which is native forest. So I guess if we found a patch of native forest, that would be the control. And the lighter green line above it is the remnant vegetation that we've been sampling within the plantation. So not the plantations themselves, but these patches of native trees that we're seeing within the plantations. And we've seen consistently over the 10 years that both in the number of species and the number of birds themselves, that we're seeing more species, more birds in those patches of remnant vegetation than in the control areas of native vegetation. So what does that mean? It tells us that these areas are incredibly important, and when we're only picking woodland birds, there's a whole range of other benefits for it. But again, this is a really strong reminder, if you like, for all of us that these things are such an important asset that we need to be managing them. So that's sort of the partnership that BirdLife Australia have been doing with us. That information, that study's wrapped up. Well, that's 10 years. That'll keep going, Dave, won't it? Sorry, I keep looking at Dave Bennett's one of my colleagues who sort of looks after these programs. But I want to talk more broadly as well, just about a variety of programs that keep going. I just want to talk really briefly about a variety of programs that we work on. There's a whole range of them. These are our 5 key pillars, if you like. This isn't set up, but large old trees is one of the pillars of the work that we're doing. There is crossover around the partnerships, and part of today's hopefully working through that. We've already talked about remnant connectivity and other bits and pieces there. But the large old trees in particular, I'll just jump straight into here. What do we want to get out of this as a business? What do New Forest want to get out of this? How do we identify and mitigate those threats to large old trees? We've talked about that at length today, but what are those things, what are those threats that we're doing? We want to improve our capacity to monitor the conditions of those trees. We've already talked a little bit about AI, and so again, there's some crossover there. And then this is the really important one for me as the operational manager for the region, is how do we take that and then implement that best practice? How do we improve what we're doing to get a better outcome? And then the last one, again, it was only touched on, but this is a massive issue for us in the region, is firewood theft. It stretches from here right across that whole estate up into the Wattle Range. That's going to be a really hard one, and we're all ears on any ideas with that. I just put.
So that's people going into your plantation.
Yep. Yeah. So not all of our plantations, but most of them have fences and gates around them, and these will be people going in the. Well, I was going to say the middle of the night, but at all times, just cutting wood. It's pretty common.
Old trees.
Yeah, falling trees, picking logs, you name it. I put this one in because I just thought it was a really cool photo. Oops, sorry. So this is some of the work that Gareth Davies is at Fed at Uni, who's doing the PhD. This is some of the tech that we're trying to use to assess the trees. This is a flattened representation of a spherical panorama taken under the canopy of a red gum tree on one of the sites. So still early days with that one. I'm not going to invite myself back, but it would be great for someone, whether it's Gareth or someone, to come back and maybe share some of the results of that at some time in the future. And then really what's next? From here, we are gathering that information. I did have some closing thoughts, so I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. I guess on the ground, what are people going to see? We did start planting the first pine trees last year at that Woolbrook property. We will start to see more pine trees going into the ground this year, which is only a few months away. So I guess I'm letting everyone know to brace yourselves for that. But really, I guess the message I really wanted to share and leave with people is what I said at the start. It is highly unusual to see someone with a PF Olsen badge or an ABP badge standing up here. Historically we would, you don't talk about things publicly. I think people have been scarred by the koala debate further south from here, and so that sort of washes through everything. Dave, who's here with me, and myself even internally, we've probably had a lot of debate about whether we should come and do this or not. And there's a lot of people even within our business that say, no, we shouldn't. So this is actually quite a significant moment for us. We do want to engage more with the local community up here, particularly with such a significant change to the landscape up here. We know that we're not doing it absolutely perfectly, and we want to learn more, and so we're doing that through the studies, but we also want to talk with people, and you help us with that problem, and that's really the message I want people to take away. I have got my business cards with me, which I'll leave. I don't want any hate mail either, but I might get some, but that's fine. I'll leave my cards here, and I know people will probably want to ring me about other stuff, because I know it's not just about trees, it's about fences and it's about kangaroos and it's all of that stuff as well. So I'm ready for that. I am hanging around all morning, so please come and grab me. My colleague Dave Bennett over here, just put your hand up, Dave. He's also heavily involved in some of those research areas as well. So grab either of us and have a chat, or grab a card and give me a call, and I'd love to catch up. That's it. Thank you to everyone.